Residential report writing and case studies, page 27, URAR, page 2, sales comparison analysis, continued. Picking up at in the valuation of single-family residential properties, the sales comparison approach is often considered to be the most meaningful approach because it relies on information taken directly from the marketplace. This approach uses similar properties that were sold to typically motivated buyers by typically motivated sellers. The sale prices of these similar properties would tend to establish what the market would be willing to pay for a subject property. This approach to value is a critical part of the valuation process for single-family appraisals made for mortgage lending purposes. It will provide the client with the market trends and documentation necessary for their decision-making process. The principle of contribution is often associated with the sales comparison approach to value. The market is used to determine the typical buyer's reaction to an improvement in terms of value, regardless of the improvement's actual cost. Cost does not automatically equate to value most of the time. The principle of substitution is also at work here, because it is said that an informed buyer will not pay more for a given property than he or she would pay for a similar property that is considered an equally desirable substitute. Data collection and analysis are required to indicate the number of comparable properties that are currently offered for sale in the subject neighborhood. Comparable is the key word for this required information. The properties considered in this section of the form should only be those that are competitive with the subject. That is, the homes that would compete with the subject for the same buyers. You would probably not consider a 3,600 square foot two-story house that is offered for sale in the neighborhood as a comparable property for the subject, which is a 1,200 one-story ranch type house. Data collection and analysis are also required in order to identify the number of comparable sales that have sold during the past 12 months in the subject neighborhood. Once again, comparable is the key word for this required information. The same example used above is applicable here. Additional research may be necessary to compile all the comparable sales that have sold during the past year. However, you should already be looking at this information for selection of your comparable sales to be used in the sales comparison approach. Furthermore, the number of comparable listings and sales indicated at the top of page 2 should also be consistent with the numbers of properties indicated on the 1004 MC addendum form. End of page. Page 28, sales comparison grid. Sales comparison grid. For the analysis grid, the secondary market appraisal guidelines specify at least 3 comparable sales be used, preferably closed within the past 6 months, that are locationally similar to the subject property. The comparable sales should be as similar as possible to the subject in terms of quality, condition, age, and size. If the comparable sales are older than 6 months, Fannie Mae requires the appraiser to comment on the necessity of using data sales for comparison purposes. The appraiser may use older sales, pending sales, etc. as additional comparables, such as number 4, number 5, and number 6, to provide support for the indication of value. These are all supplemental guidelines, as USPAP does not establish specific requirements for selection of comparable sales. Current underwriting guidelines often require an appraiser to provide at least 2 sales that are closed within the last 90 days or provide 2 listings or pending sale properties adjusted out on the sales comparison grid. According to USPAP, the appraiser must collect, verify, and analyze all information necessary to produce credible results. Further, when the sales comparison approach is necessary for credible results, the appraiser must analyze such comparable sales as are available to indicate a value conclusion. This means the appraiser, that's highlighted, is ultimately responsible for the selection of comparable sales. The appraiser should consider the guidelines and rules established by the client and intended users for comparable sales selection. However, the appraiser must not allow these guidelines and rules to result in a biased or non-credible indication of value. This section may be the most critical of all the sections of the appraisal report because the sales grid summarizes the support for your final opinion of value. The sales comparison approach is the mandatory approach on all appraisals for 1 to 4 family property loans that are to be sold to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. This is also the approach that lends itself to major errors of judgment, which reflect on your competency. The sales comparison approach stands alone as the single most important source of basic information as extracted from the market. This approach serves as the primary or sole basis for your opinion of value. Some of the more common problems encountered or revealed in reviewing this approach to value are identified below. Inadequate sales market data, research not thorough, lack of research for financing concessions of the comparable sales, use of a comparable sale with too much dissimilarity, use of comparable sales outside the neighborhood without adequate explanation, use of a sale that is not comparable to the subject property, misstating comparable sale information and then adjusting accordingly, Failure to identify verification sources. Missing or misstated date of sale information for the comparable sale. Misstated level of condition for the subject or comparable sales. Significant inconsistency between the improvement analysis on page 1 and the condition rating in the sales grid. Non-specific information inserted in the sales grid to mislead. Quality of construction manipulated, for instance, by using brick comparable sales for a frame subject. GLA of comparable sales understated to show positive adjustments. Contributory adjustments not consistent and / or supportable from the market. Use of numerous positive adjustments intended to maximize the value. Failure to analyze and explain improvements properly, especially adjustments for location, quality, and condition. Exceeding the net adjustment guidelines without adequate explanation. Exceeding the gross adjustment guidelines without adequate explanation. Many of our clients' requirements relate directly to the secondary market guidelines. If your client wants to sell the mortgage in the secondary market, he or she will have to comply with their rules. Some clients have established a guideline of 15% for the net adjustment totals and 25% for the gross adjustment tools. This was once a secondary market guideline, but it was eliminated several years ago. Please note that these are guidelines. They are not absolute. It is recognized that the appraiser may exceed these guidelines on occasion. If the guidelines must be exceeded, an explanation is required in the appraisal report. For example, this may have been the most current or most similar comparable sale within the subject's immediate neighborhood, even though the net or gross percentage adjustment totals were exceeded. The client needs to understand why the appraiser used comparable sales that exceed their established adjustment guidelines. End of page. Page 29. URAR, page 2. Sales history section. In the picture, it shows the part where of the URAR that says, I did or did not research the sale or transfer history of the subject property and comparable sales. Explain. Something about my research did or did not reveal any prior sales or transfers of the subject property, etc. Something about report the results of the research, date of the prior sale, transfer, effective date of the data sources, and something about analysis of prior sale or transfer history of the property and comparable sales. A sale is considered to have taken place if a change of ownership or change of title has occurred, even if the prior transfer was a non-arm's length such as a transfer between family members for $1. It is, nevertheless, a transfer of ownership that must be considered, analyzed, and reported. The URAR form requires documenting specific information and analysis by the appraiser. If a sale or transfer action has taken place within given timeframes per USPAP, the secondary market guidelines, the information for the sales history subsection of the form requires researching available data sources and documenting that information on the form. The source of data must be entered on the form as well as the effective date of the data source. How current is the information and when was the data source last updated? If the data source is updated daily, your data source is current. If the data source is only updated once a month, then the information could be up to 30 days old. Identifying the effective date of the data source will indicate the lag time between the effective date of the appraisal and the data research to analyze the sales history requirement. Sales history analysis is required for the subject and all comparable sales used in the sales analysis. Some of the more common data sources that may be available in your area are assessor records, multiple listing service, listing agent or selling agent, owner, recorder of deeds, HUD-1/closing statements. By this time, you should be well versed on the specific time frames for the property or properties in question. You are required to document and analyze the subject sales history for 3 years prior to the effective date of the appraisal. That is a USPAP requirement, and it is the minimum that's highlighted. Time requirement. The sales used in the sales comparison analysis are to be researched for a minimum of 1 year prior to the date of the comparable sale date. This is not, that's highlighted, a USPAP requirement. Rather, it is a Fannie Mae/Freddie Mac requirement. Once you have researched Hold on, I lost my place. Freddie Mac requirement. Once you have researched the available data sources to determine if sales have taken place within the identified timeframes for the subject and comparable sales, then reporting the information and summarizing the analysis of that information is required. The purpose of this research is to ensure that illegal flipping actions have not occurred with either the subject or the comparable sales used in the sales comparison approach. If the subject property has not transferred within the prior 3 years, or the comparables within the prior 1 year. The appraiser is instructed to leave the date of prior sale / transfer and price of prior sale / transfer fields blank in the sales history section. End of page.